I am so excited to share this. I've been holding on to it for a while, and I've just been really excited about it. I'm in the book of Job, but I will go to the book of Isaiah chapter 14, and I will also be in Ezekiel 28 because I'm going to describe some things, and it's quite amazing, and I'm excited. Okay, so in the book of Job, chapter 1, in verse 6, it says, "Now there was in a day when the sons of man came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came along with them. And the Lord said to Satan, Where does thou come? Where comest thou? And Satan said, From going to and fro the earth, from walking up and down it. And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a blameless and perfect, well, it says perfect, but it means blameless, an upright man, one that reveres God and shuns evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and says, Does Job fear God? Does he reverence God for nothing? Has thou made a hedge about him?" So that's just saying Satan knows that God puts a hedge around his people and around his house and all that he has on every side. Thou hast blessed the work of his hands and his substance. So God blesses our substance and our hands and increases in the land. Put forth thy hand now, Satan's saying, put forth thy hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, and this is very interesting, listen to this, Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only upon himself put not forth your hand. So in other words, don't touch his body. But it's interesting that he says, Behold, all that he has is in thy power. So I looked up the word power in Hebrew, and it means everything that is in your hand, and it's coupled with power. So Satan has power. We know this because he was a cherub. And when God gives gifts, he doesn't take it back. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And what kind of power does Satan have? Well, it's listed right here in Job. It said in verse 14, And there came a messenger unto Job. The oxen were plowed, and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabines are the Ethiopians, fell upon them and took them away. So first thing that's saying is that Satan is allowed to tell what he wants to the people that do not belong to the Lord. He can tell them, hey, go do this, and they'll do it. And while he was speaking, a fire of God is fallen from heaven and burneth up the sheep, and the servants were consumed. So in other words, this person is describing that from heaven came a meteor. That's what they're saying. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, another person came and said, another one of his servants came, and he said, The Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and carried them away. There again. So now Satan has control of their thoughts. He has control where he can throw a meteor down. And while he was yet speaking, he came also to another and said to the sons and the daughters were eating and drinking in the brother's house, and a great wind came from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners, and it fell on the young men, and they died. And only the servant escaped to tell Job. So now, not only does Satan have control over what the people that are not the Lord's, over telling them what to do, also he can throw down a meteor. And this is God allowing it. And he can control the wind, providing God allows it, and he allowed it. So that's the kind of power Satan has. But this is interesting. Just wait. So I'm going to skip to chapter 2. Oh, and by the way, Job never sinned when all that happened. He never blamed God or anything. So, chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves to the Lord, and Satan came also with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, where you come from? He knew. He was just saying that. And Satan answered and said, from going to and fro the earth and walking up and down it. And the Lord said to Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? And there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that reverences God and shuns evil, and still he holds fast his integrity, doesn't he? Although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause, when it says that although God movest me against him, what that meant in the Hebrew is you've enticed me, you've provoked me, you've taken me away from him. That's what that means. Thou movest against him. In other words, you've taken me away from him. And Satan answered to the Lord, skin for skin, and all that a man has he will give for his life. But put forth thy hand now and touch his bones and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, it is in thy hand. And I looked up that word hand in Hebrew, and there again it's coupled with power. Behold, it is in thy hand, thy power, but save his life. So Satan went forth the presence of the Lord and smote Job with boils from the bottom of his feet to the crown of his head. Now it gets even more interesting. In chapter 4, I'm skipping some of it because basically from chapter 3 and all that, Job's feeling sorry for himself. But he doesn't sin against God. He's just feeling sorry for himself. So I'm going to skip all that. And I'm going to go to chapter 4, verse 12. And this is where it gets very unclear. And this is where I'm going to clarify it. This is the whole reason why I'm doing this is right here. Now a thing was secretly brought to me. This is what Job's saying. And my ears received little thereof, in the thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep fall on men. So in other words, this happened in the middle of the night when most people are sleeping, but Job was awake. He was probably miserable and couldn't sleep. Fear came upon me, and fear meaning dread, came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. I find that verse interesting because when a supernatural thing happens, whether it's of God or whether it's of Satan, when a supernatural spirit is around you, you will get goosebumps. Whether it's the Holy Spirit, you will get goosebumps. But along with that will come love and peace. But if you get goosebumps and it's coupled with fear, then that's the enemy. Now, it brings me real quick to a quick story. A neighbor who was in World War II, he's passed away now, but he didn't know the Lord, but he did say something that I found matched this verse. He said he had, when he was in the army in World War II, and he had a lot of men underneath him, and I guess he was a sergeant or whatever, and he said he always knew when the enemy was going to attack, and he would have his men hide. And I asked him, I said, well, how did you know? He goes, well, the hair on my neck stood up. So I always knew. See, that was the evil spirit. So he felt it, but yet, he didn't know where it was coming from. So that's interesting. Okay, back to what I had to tell that story. Let's see. It stood still. He's still talking about the spirit, but I could not discern the form. An image was before my eyes. There was silence. And then I heard a voice saying, now this is where it gets dicey, but this is where I'm going to explain it. Shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charges with folly. How much less in them that dwell in the house of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. Now, when he talks about the dust, that comes from Genesis 2:7. And that's when the Lord conformed or made man out of the dust. Let's see, it says, and Genesis 2:7, and the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So that's where that's coming from. Okay, so he says, how much less is them that dwells in the house of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever. They perish forever without any regard. In other words, without regarding God, without committing themselves to God. Does not their excellency, meaning God, which is in them, go away? They die even without wisdom? Interesting why he said that, but it makes no sense. So in order to make sense of that, you have to go to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 10. Now we're going to find out why Satan said that to Job, because that's confusing. All they speak, and now this is God talking to Satan here. All they shall speak and say unto you are thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? So God is saying to Satan that that's what we're going to say about Satan. Thy pride is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials, in other words, is Satan's instrument, his voice. The worm is spread under thee, and the worm covereth thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They shall see thee, narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, this is the man that made the earth tremble? In other words, God is saying that we're going to say Satan is a man. Interesting. And did shake kingdoms, that made the whole world a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, open not the house of the prisoners. All the kings of the nations, even all the men, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like a detestable branch, and as a remnant, a clothing of those who are slain, thrust through the sword that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed the land and slain the people. The seed of the evildoer shall never be renowned. But I thought that was interesting. So that describes Satan. Another place that describes Satan that we're going to go next is Ezekiel 28. And I'm telling you this because I wanted to explain why Satan said what he said in front of Job. So basically, God's saying that we're going to call Satan a man. Okay, now, Ezekiel 28. The word of the Lord came again to me. Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus. Okay, now let me explain what Tyrus was. Tyrus was a king of Tyre, the city Tyre. And basically he's identified with Satan because he was an ultimate example of pride. So that king was an example of pride. And by the way, the city of Tyre is the Polynesians. And isn't it interesting how Jezebel, that killed all God's prophets, was the daughter of a Polynesian king? So that's interesting. So basically, God is using Prince of Tyrus as an example of Satan. Thus said the Lord God, because thy heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am God. I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the sea, yet thou art a man. So there again, God is calling Satan a man, and not God. Thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Behold, let's see, let me go up here to, let me go down to verse 9. Let me just say it. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. With thy wisdom and thy understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver and treasures. By the great wisdom and by all the trade hast thou increased thy riches, and thy heart is lifted up in pride.